Hi, friends. We just wanted to give you a heads up because we know many of you like to listen in the car or around the house, and you might have some little ears around. Today, there is a brief moment in our episode where we will discuss something that's probably not quite appropriate for our younger audience. So we hope that you enjoy, but we wanted to let you know so that you're not caught off guard.
Welcome to Flipping Tables, where we bring all of our religious thinking to Jesus, who flips the table for his upside-down kingdom. I'm Julie Sexton, and I'll be your host. Welcome to episode 33. This is going to be a great episode. I love this passage that we are talking about. Even though we're using Mark, I really like it out of Matthew 16, but, just block that out. I'm so excited to discuss it with Twyla and Kimberly and to be joined by all of you. If you're in a position to grab your Bible, open it up to Mark chapter 8. We are going to be talking about Jesus taking his disciples to Caesarea Philippi to ask them the most important question that all of humanity has to answer. Who is Jesus? And friends, we are big Peter fans here at Flipping Tables, and this is a question that Peter steps up to the microphone and he nails it. I don't think they actually had a microphone, but if they had one, Peter would have
dropped
the mic. Right?
I suppose so.
I don't feel like she's loving on Peter very much right now. Do you, Kimberly?
I think she's making fun of you more than
I'm a little put out that she called Peter her boyfriend. What was that? Was that on the last podcast or was that on an Instagram post? I don't know, but I was like, oh, back up, girl.
Yeah, I knew you were going to get a little territorial.
I think we've already established that Paul is your man.
No, Paul has never been my man. Oh, my husband, Paul.
Yeah.
Paul's like, wait a second.
Peter is my guy.
No. If it's Bible boyfriend, I am definitely Team Peter. I'm married to Paul, but I relate
this is feeling dirty
to Peter.
Good thing we're going to Caesarea Philippi today, I guess.
I know, it is the right location if we're going to get a little... Okay.
Let's talk about the fact that it's August and I have a blanket on my lap.
And a corduroy dress.
Because your house is so cold.
You know what? It is like, how hot is it today? What is it like?
Oh, like
mid-90s?
Yeah,
at least 94.
Yeah, it's a hot week.
You should be delighted to come to some place that's in the 60s.
No.
It feels colder when you go from so hot.
But her house is always cold. And she's still wearing tank tops and oh, is it warm in here? Do you want me to turn on the ceiling fan? I'm like, no, I didn't bring a winter coat. Leave the ceiling fan off.
I'll get you a little toboggan.
She knows she's going to be cold.
Oh, goodness.
Friends, I have always been hot. That is who I am. And I'm getting a little older, so I think I'm just going to get hotter.
How about that? It's not just for men after all. Men getting hotter with age. George Clooney.
Okay, so a couple of episodes ago, we talked about Starbucks and the whole pumpkin spice thing. So I haven't been to Starbucks. I really couldn't tell you when. I mean, we brew Starbucks coffee because we love Guatemala Starbucks coffee. But I went through a drive-through last week, actually, to buy beans, and I was like, well, I'm here. I might as well get a drink, too. And so it's August and super hot, and I ordered this drink. It was like a refresher, but when I pull up to the window, she hands me this yellow drink, and I was like, what is that? And she said, is this not what you ordered? And I said, no, I don't think so. What is that? And she said, well, it's this pineapple refresher. And I said, you know what? I'll taste it. And if it's okay, then I'll keep it. And so she handed it to me and I took a drink and I was like, you know what? This is fine. It's fine. And she was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, it's fine. No worries about it. It was a little sweet. And then I pulled away and I took another drink and I felt like I just took a big drink of chemicals. And there was this weird dehydrated pineapple floating around in it. that kind of reminded me of like, you know, when you're a kid and you eat like cereal that has marshmallows in it. I felt like someone had dropped a Lucky Charms marshmallows in my drink, and it was so off-putting. So I hate this because I try to drink local coffee shops and local drinks, but now I feel like I'm like being mean towards Starbucks because we said their pumpkin spice was a little chemically, and now I've drank this, and I'm like, this is like
pineapple is chemically too.
like this is not a good thing. And I was telling my daughters about it, and they said, "Mom, that's a terrible drink." And I said, "Yes, it is. I know that now. I didn't know before." So that's
it's good to be sure about things.
If we need to level the playing field, I really like that brown sugar oat milk shaken iced espresso drink they do. So there, we just canceled out your Starbucks complaint with a compliment.
And I get a cold brew every Saturday.
There
It's
you
a
go.
weekend treat.
So
okay.
there
Good,
you go.
good. Because
We've just leveled it out. Starbucks,
I don't want people to feel like we're
we're not anti.
anti-Starbucks or anything. I mean, I brew Starbucks coffee at my house every day.
Yeah. I'm kind of paying for coffee every day. Like I will always just brew my own coffee at home because I don't know how these folks do it that like, you know, hit the drive-thru every day. But, you know.
People do.
I know they do.
And
to
they
each their own, I
DoorDash
guess.
it, which makes it even more expensive.
That's just lazy. Sorry if that offends anyone.
Sorry, not sorry.
Okay, now I feel like you've walked us back into like offending people. we better move on to our lesson today. Before we lose all of our listeners. And now you're pulling us back in. This is not
We
good.
better just get to the word.
Oh my goodness. So friends, as we continue in our series through Mark, something that I have written in my Bible in Mark chapter 8, between verses 26 and 27, I have written Act 2. And this is to remind me that Jesus has made a shift in his ministry. We kind of talked about it a little bit in our last episode that a shift was coming. So Act 1 has been an act that has been marked by compassion for the crowds and his healing ministry and, you know, Jesus serving everybody. I mean, Jesus came to serve. But in verse 27, we start Act 2. We read about kind of a road trip. He's taking them for a long walk from the Galilee region. I actually believe it's about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee to Caesarea Philippi for this very important conversation. And while there for the very first time, Jesus is going to very clearly tell them that the next time that they are in Jerusalem, he's going to be put to death. In Act 2, Jesus is going to tell them 2 times that he is going to be put to death. And actually, if you want to know, like, we're like, well, where does Act 3 start? Well, Act 3 actually starts in Mark 10. So if you're like a real Bible nerd like I am, you might mark Act 2 and then mark Act 3 at the beginning of Mark 10. And the third time that Jesus predicts his death, because he does it 3 times, is actually in Mark 10, and they're on their way up to Jerusalem. And as I said, Act 1 is marked by compassion. And so Act 2, he's preparing his disciples for the passion of the Christ, which happens in Act 3. I feel like we're kind of putting on a little play here, a little something. So when we're in Israel, this is kind of funny, but when we actually arrive at Caesarea Philippi, we park and we get out of the tour bus. And as we're walking to the location that we're going to do our lesson, our tour guide Moshe always points out this fig tree that's there. And it's just a great place to see a fig tree, and a fig tree is very important to Israel. And Israel is often in scripture identified as a fig tree. And do you know, every time we're there and I see that fig tree and he starts talking about it, all I do is think about Adam and Eve taking fig leaves and making clothes for themselves after it all went wrong in the garden. And this is really kind of appropriate because Caesarea Philippi is a place where a lot of things went wrong. And we have to dig into the history of this location. And when we do this, we are not going to pull up pretty pictures. There are no pretty pictures associated with this place except for Peter nailing the answer to the question, "Who do you say that I am?" This place is located in a predominantly Gentile area that the Jews didn't even travel to, which is another interesting part of Jesus bringing these young Jewish men up to the foot of Mount Hermon, where Caesarea Philippi is located, to ask this question. And Twyla, I would love for you to kind of paint us a picture of this stop.
Yeah. This was kind of like Jesus bringing his boys to the red light district.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a place where there was a long history of all kinds of idolatry, of really awful things. Not just worshiping of Baal, but then Pan, who was the half man, half goat god. There was sacrifice of babies. The people believed that this was like the gates to Hades, the gates of hell was here, that this was where it led to the underworld. And people did some really awful things there. There was, bestiality happening there. And like I said, the baby sacrifices, throwing their babies into the mouth of this cave, trying to please these gods, a really awful, awful place. And so when you think about Jesus taking his homeboys, right, to this really evil place, the gates of hell, and then basically telling them, that the gates of hell, can't hold back his church. It's just so interesting when you think about the scriptures here and where they're at and like what these guys, I mean, because they were, young guys, they're probably like, oh my gosh, where did you bring us, Jesus? The things that this conversation that's going to unfold. And, I was just thinking about it as we were preparing for today. And it was like, it was like Jesus was saying, like, don't hide from evil, that, we're going to storm the gates of hell, And so, but yeah, it is one of those places on our trip that it's a really interesting location, but you just think of the history and it's wild. It's wild.
Yeah, it's actually a kind of a pretty location now. Currently, I mean, it's more like a nature reserve. And, we stand and look up at this cave.
Yeah.
And that there's actually a place that people referred to as the gates of hell.
Yeah.
And again, we're sticking with Mark, but we are going to draw back to that at the end of the lesson. And that comes out of Matthew 16. But this place was, Caesarea Philippi was actually named because it belonged to the house of Herod. And so Herod's son Philip named it after himself and Augustus Caesar in the 1st century. But like you said, Twyla, this has been like the Canaanites worshiping Baal, child sacrifices, Pan, like people would actually have sex with goats to try to recreate this god Pan. And Pan actually is the source of the word panic. And a lot of these images and these things that we're talking about that happened in this place, I mean, that does really stir up panic within you. You're like, this is a horrible place. And again, it's a place that Jews did not travel to. And it's a place that is rooted in false religion. Aside from all of the pagan worship associated with Pan, there was even a great temple in Jesus's time. It was a white marble temple that was built to the godhead of Caesar because they worshiped Caesar. They treated Caesar as though he was a god. And this was the backdrop that Jesus strategically chose for this very important conversation. So, Kimberly, Well, we would love for you to read out of Mark 8, just verses 27 to 30 to get us started.
Sure. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
So all of the possible identities that the people gave about Jesus' identity, they were connecting him to the Messiah forerunners. And this teaches us that they underestimated Jesus. For them to say that he might be John the Baptist, or maybe he was Elijah, or any number of other Old Testament prophets, means they fall short of giving Jesus the full respect that he deserved. The people were putting Jesus in the category of the Messiah forerunners. They were underestimating him. Jesus' true identity. That was Peter's moment of brilliance. And it is way beyond Peter. This is God-given insight when Peter steps up and says, "You are the Messiah." Peter gives the right answer, but he doesn't have the full picture. Peter thinks this means that Jesus is going to overthrow Rome. And Jesus is like, "Okay, hold on. Yes, Peter, you're right about who I am. But now I need to tell you that I've actually not come to overthrow Rome. I've actually come to overthrow sin and death. It's good that you know that I'm the Messiah, but I need to teach you that the Messiah comes first as the suffering servant, the one that Isaiah wrote about in Isaiah 53. And now let's read verses 31 to 33. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Peter had all of his dreams about to come true. Rome was going to get what they deserved. And then Jesus said, "It's not going to go down that way. Not yet. First, I'm going to let Rome actually put me to death on a cross." And this was a devastating blow. Peter is standing there. He is looking at that cave at the gates of hell, and he's like, no. Jesus, what you're saying, it doesn't make any sense. You can't surrender to Rome and let them put you to death like a criminal. You need to make them pay for what they've done. 1 minute, Peter was confessing Jesus as the Messiah, speaking words that were given to him from God. And then he became the mouthpiece for Satan. And I love how Mark says that Jesus turned and he looked at his disciples. And I just picture them. They don't know what's happening. They've probably got tears in their eyes. Their hearts are breaking. They don't understand what's happening. What's he saying? Why is he talking about that he is going to be put to death? Like, what does that even mean? This is completely table flipping for them. And then Jesus lovingly rebuked Peter in front of them. And I believe that Jesus was firm in his rebuke. But a firm rebuke from God is still a loving rebuke. God disciplines those he loves. Jesus is like, "Peter, you don't have in mind the concerns of God. God is first and foremost concerned with humanity's standing with him." Now, Peter didn't get that. The disciples didn't get that. They didn't understand what was happening. But we understand that. God is first and foremost concerned with our standing with him. And Jesus, essentially, he took them to Caesarea Philippi, this horrendous place, to share the gospel with them. Because with the gates of hell as a backdrop, Jesus told them something that they didn't want to hear and couldn't even begin to comprehend. He is basically saying to them, I'm going to be pierced for your transgressions and their transgressions. Picture him pointing. I'm going to be crushed for your iniquities and their iniquities. The punishment that they deserve for all these evil and wicked things that they've done here, and the punishment that you and all of humanity deserves. Everything from the very beginning, everyone from the very beginning has been like sheep that have gone astray. Everyone has turned to their own way. And the Lord is laying it on all of them. I'm going to pour out my life. That's what Jesus is saying. I'm going to be numbered with the transgressors, all for your sake and for the sake of many. Now, that was me taking some creative liberty and inserting some of Isaiah 53. That's not all what Jesus said there, but when Jesus says that the Son of Man is going to suffer and he's going to be rejected and he's going to be put to death, that's really what he's saying. That's behind it. I love thinking about it this way, thinking about Jesus taking them to this horrendous place and essentially beginning to share the gospel with them. The part of the gospel that changes everything for us. This is the best news that we have ever heard. And again, it's the first time that Jesus told them that he was going to give his life. Now, they didn't understand that it was for the ransom of many. They don't understand what's really happening. But if you think about what we talked about the gates of hell, this place, Caesarea Philippi, and this false god Pan, and that we get this word panic from that. I think he wants to tell them, guys, I don't want you to panic when the elders and chief priests and the teachers of the law hand me over to Rome. He also wants them to know that he knew that it was going to happen and that it was part of the plan. They were involved in something much bigger. And I think it's so important to kind of make this, and Mark writes it in a way that we read it that we go from Caesarea Philippi to this first prediction of his death. And I don't know for sure that they were still at Caesarea Philippi, but it was still, like, even if they had moved away from it, it was in the rearview mirror. It's what they remember. But for me, like when I was reading it and thinking about what if they were still in eyeshot and he was able to kind of point to that place and to the and again, it was over their head. Like every time he tells them that he's going to be crucified, these 3 times that he's going to do this, it's over their head. And they often act just kind of clumsy about it, like what is going on? But I can't end without bringing a portion of Peter's confession, and Twyla's already alluded to it. You like, we want to get to Matthew 16 because that scene, because Matthew includes so many more details than Mark does. But do you want to read those verses? Just a few of them, Twyla?
Yeah.
Just read
starting in verse 16. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it.
We love it because, friends, Jesus established his church at the gates of hell at Caesarea Philippi. And this is like one of my favorite verses because I think there's just like some kind of like warrior that rises up within me when I read verse 18, that the gates of hell will not overcome his church. That is so encouraging. That is such good news. There is no reason to panic about anything going on in the world today. The church will prevail. The church of Jesus Christ can't be brought down with money. It can't be stopped by power. It can't be stopped by anything. Since Jesus said this, kingdoms have risen and fallen, and the church remains. The church will triumph because Jesus triumphed. He had to go and, go to the cross, pay for our sin, and be resurrected. And that's where our hope is anchored to. Jesus established the church. He said, you're Peter. And, this was like we say when we're reading Mark, that we're reading Peter's gospel that Mark wrote. But that was left out there. And so you have to come back to, and it's interesting to me that I feel like when Peter has like a really big moment, the spotlight often shifts a little bit from the way it was written by Mark. But, Matthew tends to pick up and show that. And again, Peter's not the star of this, but Peter was going to be the leader of the church. And he made an incredible confession. And Jesus built his church on himself, on Jesus. Because even that good, amazing, mic-dropping moment that Peter had, that confession is not big enough to sustain the church. The church is sustained because Jesus is who he is, and he's done what he has done for the church, and he is our foundation. He is our cornerstone. So if you are in a place, and I have a tender heart for everyone who feels a little heartbroken over the American church, because I'm right there with you. I mean, all of us are. We are right there with you, but this is where we draw strength from. We draw strength from the fact that the church is always going to end up on top. It's just being refined. He's working it out, and we can trust him with it. And so as we're wrapping up this episode, I am going to start with my bright spot, because my bright spot really ties into the end of this lesson. Kimberly mentioned in our last episode that she had just read a book by Dr. Russell Moore, Losing Our Religion. And I have finished that book now, and such a good book. But Dr. Moore was on a podcast, the Annie F. Downs podcast. Mm-hmm. And in that episode, he said something that I just thought was a mic drop moment for me. Because when he said it, I just felt like so seen. And because, again, church is kind of a hard thing for me right now. When you grew up in a cult of religion like I did, and then have had some bumpy places along the way with the church, when he said that we need to make peace with homelessness because church is not what it used to be, he just spoke right into that. He just spoke right into the heaviness that we feel, a lot of us in the American church, because it's not what it used to be. And I do have this sense of homelessness within me, and to know that I'm not alone, that there are a lot of believers. And I know Kimberly and Charlie, you guys feel this way too. We love the church, and we're sticking with the church, just like how Jesus sticks with the disciples, and the church is going to triumph. So there's a lot of encouragement, not just from our lesson, but from, this quote and that book that really blessed both of us.
What about you, Kimberly? What's your bright spot for this last week?
Bright spot for me was, my oldest son started middle school, and I was not quite sure how it was going to go. The timing is different. School in general is just a struggle for him, but I picked him up. Well, actually, I didn't pick him up from school. He had practice right after school, so I didn't even see him until it was almost 6 o'clock on the first day of school. But he smiled, and he was in a great mood, and I was like, thank you, Lord. We're going to be okay.
We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Be okay.
Yes.
I love
So,
it.
I mean, that was just so bright for me.
That is sweet. I
Yeah.
love it.
How about you, Twyla?
Mine's much lighter. But I'm going to tie us back to the beginning of this episode. It has been blazing hot. And I've really enjoyed the last 2 mornings. My sweet little Theo, after Finn's gotten on the bus at, before the crack of dawn, I feel like it's still 6 something. He'll say, "Are we going to go on our walk now, Mommy?" And it's good because, we have to get out and walk early if we're going to walk. But to know that he loves that little morning walk time with me and that he looks forward to it, it was just really sweet. So when we were walking this morning, I was like, buddy, I appreciate that you like walking with Mommy and that you encourage me to do good things and that you want to spend this time with me. So that's been my bright spot
so
this week, is
sweet.
just our little morning walks together. So anyway, well, friends, we hope you enjoyed this episode and you feel encouraged. And we hope that you will keep following the table flipper and leave the table flip into Jesus.